privacy, master data management, and AI governance. So that's from a background perspective, the space where I'm working with at IBM. I'm very excited to be here with you today so that we can have a thought leadership exchange on the topic of the data dividend and how you, in your roles at your companies, can help your business units to drive more value out of data. This is a challenge for many companies because we need to get three things together the right way. The first question is from a people point of view, what needs to be done if you're in the role of a chief analytics officer, a chief data officer, to enable the organization with the right skills, the right organizational setup, that you can drive efficiently outcome from the data assets you have in your enterprise. And there are many companies which struggle right now to figure out the right balance between maybe centralized data and analytics teams versus embedding some of those team members in the broader organization, in the business units and such. So as this afternoon is progressing, we would like to engage with you on this topic on how you deal with the evolving nature on skills, the people, the organizational setup to get your organization proficient with the use of AI. The second part we would like to talk about as part of this event today is the processes. How do you figure out the right setup from a process point of view where you can plug in AI capabilities to drive business outcomes for your enterprise? And then lastly, if we have the right organizational setup, the right processes in place and so forth, what are the technology components and platforms, and what characteristics do they need to have that you can achieve the outcomes you are looking for? One of the challenges I have seen over the last 6 to 12 months quite frequently is the topic of data consumability, the notion of data products, self-service for the line of business user, ideally with IT not even in the picture anymore. And this desire that data is easily accessible, has the right form factor for the business users to consume at the right time, and so on, is putting the chief information security officer, the chief privacy officer a little bit at unease, because these roles are wondering, can we still achieve the compliance needs we need to comply with? So the ability to open up self-service on data products, data marketplaces and such, always begs the question on how can you automate that this is happening in a secure and trusted fashion, the governance components in the data platforms you are running. And these are the topics we would like to explore with you throughout the afternoon, and I'm very excited to have that conversation with you. I would like to introduce now Walter Pascarelli from The Economist, who is co-hosting the event today with me. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, and with that being said, handing over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Martin. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be here with you. I would like to express a very warm welcome to everyone here, both in San Jose as well as joining us virtually from home, to our event called The Data Dividend. Today's forum is part of a series of events that are sponsored by IBM that deals specifically with the question on how organizations can get strategic value from data. I'm really pleased to say this is the third year where we are working together. Last year, we organized a number of live events across the world, from Mumbai, Atlanta, Milan, Toronto, New York. So I'm very pleased and excited to start this third year really with some fresh momentum here in San Jose with you. My name is Walter Pascarelli. I'm a manager at Economist Impact, the research and analysis arm of The Economist. I deal with anything that basically happens at the intersection between technology and business. But I spent really my entire career advising both governments as well as corporations on their data governance strategies. Now, I'm probably not saying anything new when I say data is at the forefront of business and investment strategies. I think this is now a pretty well-known story. One of our surveys that we produced actually in the past year with 600 C-level executives also really confirms that. We asked them, well, in the next decade, what is your top investment priority? The top answer, I should say, that we received was actually very clear. In the next decade, 600 C-level executives across the world say that the top investment priority will be investments into data-driven technologies. And in this sort of story of the technological advancements in the future, data is really at the heart of everything. Data is at the heart of large language models, of transformers, of generative AI, to mention maybe a buzzword. And it is really part of sort of some of the most exciting and disruptive applications that we will be able to see in the future. But beyond the commercial elements, there is, of course, also a necessity to mitigate the risks, to think about the ethics, and to ensure that the outcomes that these systems generate will be trustworthy. And that's why I think it's also pretty fitting that we're holding this conversation today in California, which is known for its advanced privacy and security measures in the country. But at the end of the day, in today's ever-changing economic landscape, the question still remains, which is how can we stay competitive in an age driven by data? And that's what we will aim to answer with 3 panels, as Martin just introduced. The first one here will be called The Best versus the Rest, where we look at sort of what separates pioneering firms working with data from laggards. The second one is focused on data literacy and talent. I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. And then we have a third one called Data-Driven Futures, where we look at, okay, we have now this foundation. We now have sort of like everything in place. How can we ensure that this data will be used in a way that is ethical and be done in a responsible manner? We've also added a pretty unique twist to this event in the sense that we will have at the end of this forum a debate session where you, the members of the audience, will be able to participate directly in the conversation based on some motions that we will be providing. More details on that later on. Let's first get started with the panel discussion. A big thank you again to IBM for sponsoring this event, as well as, of course, to our fantastic set of speakers who are joining us here from all different kinds of industries and companies. So without further ado, I'm really excited to get started with the first panel called The Best versus the Rest. And for this, I'm very pleased to be welcoming, first of all, Martin Oberhofer, Director in IBM, Distinguished Engineer at IBM. Secondly, Palash Sharma. Feel free to come on stage. Thank you very much. Ashok Srivastava, as well as Yao Morin, Chief Data Officer at GLL Technologies.
Hello, good to see you.
You're welcome.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you. Careful. Good to see you.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Well, I would like to start the discussion really by grounding us sort of into a look into the new year. We're already in February. I'm not sure I can say we're in a new year anymore, but let's keep it that way. Could you provide me, each of you, starting first of all with Martin and then Yao, just leading all the way back to me, in just a couple sentences, really, in your experience, what is right now sort of something that data and analytics leaders are looking forward to in 2023? What's sort of top of mind?
So the major challenges I'm seeing at our clients are around a couple of things. I would like to illustrate this with an example from a conversation I had with a chief data officer from one of our European banking clients. When we started the conversation, he was telling me his data scientists are doing data science on Thursdays and Fridays only. So that statement baffled me a little bit because data scientists are, from a payroll point of view, very expensive employees. There's typically a challenge on retention with turnover, switching from company to company. And then if they are expensive talent and they are spending only 40% of their time on what they should be doing, the question is, how can you make them more productive? And digging into that problem, there was a question on findability of data. How can you ensure that the data products they need to do model training is readily available with the right data quality metrics and such? And how can you do all of that without compromising on the regulatory needs which are out there as well? So the leaders in this space, the way I look at it, they are building platforms which address the problem that analytics can be scaled out, that the data scientists can focus their time where they are best suited for, which is building the models to optimize the business. And the leading companies are taking that pain away, making this group more productive. This is one of the elements I would see in leading companies.
Thank you very much. Yeah, up next. Thank you.
For me, definitely the top of mind is on how do we leverage data and show our value and impacts in this macroeconomic downturn. I think that for my company, right now we're really looking at how do we optimize our business operations, how do we leverage data to guide us to make the right business decision, to invest in the right thing, and also help our clients to invest on the right thing as well.
Hi, my name is Ashok Srivastava. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Intuit. You know, for the last, I'd say 20 plus years, people have been talking about the importance of data, probably much longer than that. And The Economist is actually the publication that identified data as the new oil. So you might have heard of this before. That actually came from The Economist, and it was a very forward-looking point of view at the time that was written. If data is the new oil, then artificial intelligence is the new electricity. And the fact is that companies who do not adopt artificial intelligence at scale are going to be extinct in the future. And we at Intuit are at the very forefront of the adoption of artificial intelligence, and that implies that data is the substrate behind everything, and that's what we're thinking about. So does it keep me up at night? No, because we're already very much in that direction.
Thank you. Bob.
Sure. You know, we are seeing the use cases of data both on the artificial intelligence side as well as the normal business intelligence, you know, just growing tremendously. And the responsibility on the data analyst and data scientist are increasing dramatically, right? Because the decisions are being used to not only just suggest someone or recommend something, but they are actually just directly in the heart of mission critical processes, right? So a mistake, the cost of mistake is increasing tremendously. And that basically, going to Martin's point, right, it requires significant amount of platform engineering, significant amount of observability, lineage, security, privacy, right? So data truly has become like a first-class citizen. It is everywhere. And sometimes, you know, we are living in a golden age of data, and the amount of use cases, the important use cases. Earlier, what used to happen is you do analysis and you put forward a recommendation. Now what's happening is you just take the action directly from the data platform. So that transition from being a recommender to the doer also means significant responsibility.
Right.
And that is something that we are seeing left, right, and center. And that means tremendous improvement on talent, tremendous improvement on platform, tremendous improvement on privacy and security and so on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Let's talk for a moment about sort of let's call it maybe the raw materials that an organization needs to have in order to really create this use data-driven technologies. And let's focus on really what is sort of this data foundation, everything that needs to be ready. And Martin, I'd like to start on this one with you, actually. I really like sort of the analogy that you mentioned about this organization that uses data on Mondays and Thursdays. But if now we think about sort of an organization that has a good data foundation, let's imagine an organization that strategists would potentially call data ready. How would this organization look like, in your opinion? What sort of are the key characteristics you would see in there?
So starting on the people side, if we want to leverage AI, the line of business users need to get data literate, for lack of better terms. If we think that, let's say, in insurance, an insurance claim agent needs to look at a recommendation from a machine learning model, whether or not this is a fraudulent claim, then the question is, what's the confidence of that AI or ML recommendation to me? So we need to raise, on the people side, the level of knowledge on what it means to work with data. So there needs to be a foundational level of competency in the usage of data. And some of the leading companies, they are actually teaming up with universities to get for their leadership teams education on data literacy, essentially. I met last year a couple of CDOs which were running 6 weeks training program for their entire management team that make them understand why they need to raise the bar on data literacy within their organization. So that's one element. And then the other part, which is very essential, is what I would call a knowledge graph. You can't find data if it's not inventorized and semantically enriched that business users understand it and can actually work with it. Nobody's looking for KNA1 when searching for a data asset. A technical person in SAP knows that this is the root table of customer master, but nobody would search with that term. So you need to have, around the data assets, you want to have usage in your enterprise, a rich semantical body describing what are the machine learning models, their data assets, and so forth they are supposed to be using. So a key element on the foundational layer, the one I would call out, is semantically enriched metadata layer, which is connecting the dots. That enables governance, findability, trust in the data with quality, all of it. But without that, you are basically blind.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Paulo, continuing the conversation that Martin has just highlighted a couple of these key components on the people side, having sort of the access to the data and the right availability. To what extent do you find is it possible sort of to drive this forward with a data strategy? What is the role of a data strategy in sort of achieving this? Or is this sort of more a process that sort of grows incrementally through target investments? Or what's your experience on that?
Yeah, and I think in the last few years, we have seen significant investment in the data strategy and data engineering side, right? Companies that have invested a lot on trying to extract insight from data, they have come to the realization that unless they have the right foundation, they just really cannot generate insight, right? So there's a lot of innovation happening on the pipelines, engineering, how do you store it, catalog it, how do you make sure that your semantic layer, there's one true semantic layer across the company. And that strategy really yields the result in better AI as well as better business intelligence and metrics and so forth, right? So we have seen a lot of growth in that area, and companies are realizing that you need to get that right. And of course, all of that in a compliant, secure manner, right? Yeah. So that's super important. So there's a lot of work happening in that space, and it's now taking the right position, not only just the insight part, but how do you get to the insight? Right? The explainability, the observability is becoming very important.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Yao, is that sort of, do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I see a lot of investment in tools for data people. As you remember, when software engineering started to become a thing, a practice, you see a lot of tools such as GitHub, Jira to help manage the workflow. We are seeing similar trend in the data world where you see a lot of data observability tools, data governance, entity resolution, all those things is to help data people to get that data ready state, right? Why? Like I think everyone here wants to get to that state. It's like, oh, I don't need to worry about if my data quality is bad. I don't need to worry about whether all the data makes sense linked together. But to get to that state, I think we still have a lot of work to do. And then this is, I feel like a lot of companies are still struggling with.
Interesting. So if we look at these capabilities and sort of this establishment of the data foundation, I think one of my main key takeaways from speaking with leaders in the field, such as yourself, is really that it's not building a data foundation does not mean sort of you've reached that one threshold, and once you're there, that's it, you get your certificate and like congratulations. But it's more really like an endeavor, a continuing endeavor that keeps on going as new technologies emerge, as new data is collected. We sort of need to keep working on that. And Ashok, I'd be particularly curious to hear your opinion on that. As you mentioned, sort of Intuit is already with both feet in sort of this data opportunity. And sort of how do you sort of redesign, reinvent yourself over and over again as sort of this, to keep pace with change, essentially?
Intuit is a 40-year-old young company. It's a company that started 4 decades ago and has reinvented itself again and again. It was a desktop company that literally sold software on CDs at stores. And from there, it's turned into a very large financial services company that helps people power prosperity around the world. In that journey, we've gone through many, many changes over time. And this data transformation and the AI transformation has been going on for a while, and we declared a very clear data strategy. Number one, clean data shall be available to anyone who needs it with the right permissions. Number two, that it will flow at the right speed. If it needs to be moving fast, it'll move fast. If it doesn't need to move fast, it won't move fast. Real-time capabilities will be there. That it will be governed and managed in a way that the people who need to have access will have it. People who should not have access will not have it. It needs to have that foundation layer so that if you are a data producer, you adhere to the standards that we have designed. And if you don't meet those standards, you can't actually ship your data across our bus. Think about that level of governance. That is the direction that we're headed. We've already achieved many of these capabilities already. So as we move into the future, what we're looking at is taking this strong, powerful foundation of data and then having a similar artificial intelligence layer that runs on top of this thing so that we can democratize artificial intelligence for everyone that needs to use it within the company. And that's the direction that we're headed. I'm super excited about it. And I couldn't agree more with you and my fellow panelists here that it's essential that we do this. It takes a tremendous amount of investment. Mostly what it takes, though, I have to say, is conviction. If you don't have the conviction to do this, it's not going to happen. If you wait for others to do it, they won't do it. You have to actually lead from the front. You have to drive the message, and people will happily follow in your footsteps.
Thank you so much. I think that's actually a really nice transition into another angle, which is possibly sort of the discussion around data access and democratization. Most of the times I hear that sort of people say, oh, there's this abundance or of availability of data. And historically, there's been sort of with the outside of sort of digital data, the data that could be derived from the web, there's been the emergence of big data, as they call it. So sort of really like an unprecedented amount of information. And Yao, I think this is actually a question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
In the conversation leading up to this event, you mentioned to me that the way that you collect data is actually not through like website or sort of the web, but it's actually a little bit different. Could you?
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, definitely, it's very close to my heart. I had a technology background. I have always been in technology companies. JLL, I don't know if a lot of you know what kind of company it is. It's actually a commercial real estate company. And then I was like laughing a little bit when you said that Intuit was 40 years old, and actually JLL is 240 years old company. So if your company is older than JLL, please raise your hand. But the key thing is that in a lot of, I didn't realize that, but in a lot of companies, and I noticed some of you also from companies that are from a more traditional industry background, not all tech, and where a lot of the data are actually generated by human. Our brokers will generate a lot of the vacancy information, the the investment, how much you pay for rent, how much what your building's surrounding is, whether there is a daycare center, whether there is a subway. All of these are actually not readily available from web. And then what do? You actually need to really find a strategy on how do you collect those data, how do you trust those data, how do you master them together, link them together. That actually imposes a very, very interesting problems that I have not dealt with before, but it has been very interesting to solve that problem as a data practitioner. So it has been a journey.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Could you specify that? You mentioned like solving that particular problem. Like what's sort of been your approach on that? Just for, I'm sure this is quite valuable for our audience members.
I would want to say that it's rocket science. It's actually not. We do deploy different human beings to collect data, really doing that data collection part. But what technology can do is once you collect those data, how do you systematically, how do you actually match those data together, and how do you validate it? For example, everyone can go to a building and see how many floors are there, how many renters are there in that building, but do you trust that data? So how do you actually leverage algorithms and technology to actually verify the data, start building that trust and confidence on those data is also like a really interesting technology problem that we are solving. And on the other hand, we also cares about everything because building and humans are all connected together. So anything that a person cares, we care. So like how do you actually find the right data that matters to the problem that we are trying to solve is also a very interesting thing. That goes into feature selection when you're building data science model or forecast model. And so we deploy a lot of statistical method to actually trying to do feature selection and trying to distill those data.
Brilliant. And so the kind of logical progression, so okay, now we have collected data, there has been availability, it is within our organization, but Martin, I remember one of the points we just discussed earlier is that there's always sort of the risk of operating in silos, and that maybe one organization, one part of the organization keeps data in one place, and then there's another part which is, how does a good data access service looks like in your opinion? What are sort of the main elements that you think should be fulfilled?
So the problem you are raising, which we discussed a little bit earlier today, is basically the following. Some of the organizations have IT organizations which are aligned with the line of business they serve. So they have budgets to run IT basically on a line of business unit. So if one line of business unit has a data asset and somebody else wants to use it, then there's the question, why should I pay for your data operations between the business units? To overcome that challenge, leading companies started to establish what they call a data product hub or a data product marketplace internally. And what that basically means is, as a data owner, I can say you can leverage my asset. These are the SLAs which go with it. Some of the assets might be free of charge. Some we do a cross-business unit cost recovery model. The governance is built in, so you don't need to worry about privacy, compliance, and all of it. But you would need to internally strive towards building a data marketplace type platform, which takes care of seamless access where everybody can find all the known assets in the enterprise, which have been curated from a quality perspective and so forth. And leading companies are putting such structures in place to tear down the boundaries which for historic reasons were there before. But this is a non-trivial exercise, and it takes companies some time, depending on the internal culture, to overcome those organizational boundaries. But that would be target vision to build towards.
Interesting. Well, we actually conducted a study just a while back where we surveyed a number of IT leaders across various kinds of industries, and we actually found, to provide some numbers, a study by Economist Impact found that 61% of projects need to be terminated because of a lack of access to the right data. Not seldom, even though an organization technically would have them, but basically people cannot get access to the right kinds of data sets. So project leaders get approval from the C-suite, they get the funding, and then they cannot finish the project because they don't have the right kinds of data. And Paula, I'll be curious to hear from you. Does that number sound right to you? Is it sort of an experience you've been able to observe in the field as well, or is it too high, too low, or?
It sounds a little bit higher, but I'm not surprised that a significant portion of projects do not fulfill or do not achieve their potential because of lack of access of the data, right? One of the challenges, and that we talked about, where the data gets generated and how it gets ingested, right? There's a whole data life cycle, which is the generation happens either on website or software or, in some cases, human-based data generation, right? You need to ingest it, you need to store it, then you need to, clean it and make it ready for consumption, and then provide access to everyone. And that whole life cycle is pretty leaky pipeline. So you might have a situation where you assumed that certain data will be generated, is not being generated, or certain data is generated but not being ingested. It's ingested, but it is in such a bad shape that you really cannot use it. So typically, you will find that projects that take this assumption and do not think about end-to-end data life cycle, they get stumped when they see that either the generation is not correct, or ingestion is not correct, or the storage is not there, or cleaning is not there, and so forth. So what we do is, and this is where we need to think end to end. It's not only about how can we generate insight, but we need to really understand how the data is being generated, how do we bring it together, how do we clean it, and then how do we mine it. So that's where a lot of effort is going on, as we discussed originally. That is the full end-to-end life cycle. And still companies really do not, in many projects, they don't get to that point, because in some stage of this life cycle, something is typically broken.
Interesting. And Ashok, the next question is for you. When it comes to sort of like understanding what's actually possible as an organization, there is almost sort of a need to understand, to have a self-awareness, basically, as a company, to basically, how do you assess your own capabilities? Is there a way that you can ensure that expectations that you have as a company to yourself as well as reality are matched? What's the best way to sort of approach this issue?
By being plain and transparent about your current state. And the way we do that is by publishing the state of our systems, their quality, availability of data, how much clean data we have, what the status of the data lake is, what access is. That transparency brings trust, and then the trust brings speed. Right? When you know that you can trust something, when you know that the data is available, then you can go and build models and do analytics and do the other types of work that's necessary. So we've invested in building this kind of capability within the company so that people have access to it. I've worked in many other places where data was more siloed, or it was in a different situation. I can tell you after all of that experience that it makes a lot of sense. It accelerates your journey if you actually deliberately make decisions that enable the access to clean data at scale.
Interesting.
I remember you said during lunch that conviction is a really important thing, right? That you have to really convict to making data available, accessible, and clean, and then doing it deliberately. So that really resonates when you said that.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. I feel that a lot of things require a feeling of extreme ownership. In other words, it may not be my fault, but it is my problem. And that point of view generates a lot of momentum within the company. So I joined the company about 5 years ago. There were many things working extremely well, some things not so well. Well, when you come into a situation like that, the goal is to serve the end customer at Intuit. This idea that your organization and my organization are not going to work together for some reason cannot actually function. That's a state of dysfunction. What we need to create is a state of functionality where teams are aligned on a common mission, and that common mission is to serve the end customer. And when you do that, and you have that conviction, then people really like to follow that. And they really like to see that their work is making it to the end of the pipeline, that it is changing the financial lives of customers. And that's a huge motivator. Whatever your industry is, whether you're in finance, whether you're in medicine, whether you're in business, law, whatever your area is, if you focus on the end customer and think about how to align all of your resources to solve it, many of the issues that we were hearing about budgets and all these things, they don't go away, but they become less important compared to the actual mission, which is to solve things for real people outside.
Thank you very much. And I would like to bring the conversation, or the next question to Martin. Martin, I think you must have a really good overview of sort of what's going on in the field, so especially when we talk about using this data for developing AI applications and sort of advanced technologies. In your view, sort of looking over the horizons and maybe comparing some companies, what distinguishes sort of leaders and laggards in how they use AI? What sort of are some of the common key ingredients for success and the common reasons for failure when scaling for AI?
So that's an excellent question. If we look at the consumability of AI, the question is, how efficient can you roll out, for example, AI models for the business? Can you do 5 a year, 100 a year, 1,000 a year? And that means, are you internally, from the way you have built your teams, the way you intersect with the business on OKRs, why are you doing those AI projects in the first place, driving business outcomes? Are you well aligned on the business side? And do you have a technology platform which allows you to scale out in the usage of AI? And leading companies, they invest on the platform side in a scale out function around AI. This also includes monitoring capabilities. If you have a large number of AI models in production, you need to know what is going on, is there model drift, etc. Leaders in this space, they have, how would I call it? They have smithed the tool of AI to something they can wield with proficiency and mastery. And the platforms they have available at their disposal are allowing the scale out they need. And these platforms have a lot of automation built into it, from a dev QA prod life cycle, from a monitoring life cycle, and so on. And on the organizational people side, clear KPIs, why this is done overall to drive their outcomes. So I think these are some of the key ingredients to look at if you want to benefit from AI at scale. Alignment on the business OKRs, and on the technology level, building a platform which scales for you.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Paulo, another question that I wanted to bring to you. Sort of, we've talked about the data foundation, we've talked about the business strategy, we've talked about sort of data access and democratization. And there's almost, when we talk about data, an element of a sort of like, well, let me phrase it differently. It's that some of the CDOs that we've spoken to said that the data strategy is the business strategy. The data is being used in order to create that cohesive picture across the business. And in your opinion, in what ways can data be used in this sort of story to connect disparate parts of the business, delivering better value to basically one common sort of vision, maybe in the spirit that Ashok mentioned earlier when talking about conviction?
Yeah, sure. And data is truly the Z thread that runs across the organization. If you think about how the software is built, right? So typically in a big, large, complex B2B company, you will have finance software, then sales software, then marketing software, then supply chain software, and so on. And each of them are generating the data. But truly, when you see left to right, when you connect, and that's the customer centricity point that Ashok mentioned, right? Customers do not care about whether they are stuck on finance systems or whether they are stuck on sales systems and so on, right? And if we need to really understand the full customer life cycle, is the data that flows from one end of the enterprise to the other end of the enterprise, including customers and partners and suppliers and so forth. And that's the reason why our end-to-end data strategy is really important for serving your customers correct. And that's why the functional silo software or different IT teams cannot give a picture of end-to-end customer life cycle. So data really represents what is happening within the company, how are we developing the products, how are we shipping the product, how are we selling the product, how we are servicing the product with the customer at the center, right? So more and more companies that understand that, and most of the business strategy is about growth and revenue and profitability, which boils down to how do you win the market and how do you serve the customer better. And without end-to-end data strategy, that just cannot happen. And that's the only place where you can see everything left to right in a CDO organization or an organization that is responsible for data end-to-end in the company.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. All right, I'm afraid we're already out of time, but we do have some 5 minutes for some audience Q&A. We have a microphone just roaming around there. I would like to invite everyone in the audience to raise some questions. Anyone who has saw some reason? Okay. Great. Please make sure to introduce yourself with your name and the company you work for.
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Vishal Sethi. I work for Bristol-Cohn. It's a product-centric consulting firm. Ashok, question for you. You mentioned about semantic richness, building semantic richness, and then in terms of metadata and overall. I was just curious to ask you, what, as per you, is a most actionable, simpler approach to go in that direction, building semantic richness in the data?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
If I understand correctly, the question is Ashok's point about semantic richness that you mentioned earlier, and what's the best approach for an organization to work towards this idea of semantic richness that you mentioned?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. Sorry I didn't hear you. The approach that we're finding that's very successful is to build what we call a data map. So imagine a map, literally, with circles on it, where each circle corresponds to a data set. And that data set has the provenance associated with it. In other words, the lineage, how did this data come to be? It has a definition associated with it, which means each element in there is well documented, along with the lineage of how that documentation arose. Quality metrics associated with it. We have defined 5 quality metrics. Those quality metrics have numbers associated with it. Is it 98%? Is it 93%, et cetera? We also have data associated with it regarding usage. So for instance, if I put out a data set and there are only 3 people out of 3,000 that use it, it's different than if 300 out of 3,000 use it. So usage metrics are there. This then is connected literally with other data sources that are there. And so this map then provides you with that semantic information. So if you've got a data set here and it's got 20% usage for the entire population, and this other one that has 50% and they're linked, it tells you something compared to if it was 2 and 5% respectively. So we maintain that, and we also prevent bad data from coming into the map. It's not allowed. And that's the high degree of governance that leads to good semantic information, data at the right time, cleanliness metrics met, and also more productive workers.
Just a quick follow-up on that part. You mentioned about getting to a maturity of data governance, where you wouldn't let data producers to even ship the data if they don't follow the standards.
Yeah.
Is that something real achievable given where you are in our, it's tough, right?
It's a provocative statement, and when I made the provocative statement, I watched my peers as I said it because I wanted to see how they were going to react. They reacted well. We're on this journey. It's not complete yet, but frankly, at the scale that we're operating, it's the only mechanism that I can think of that will actually preserve the degree of governance and speed that we need in order to deliver AI and to deliver ultimately for the end customer. So what this means is that we have a data lake, and that data lake is the repository where information flows from different parts of the company. However, in order to get data into that lake, we happen to control the pipelines that go into it. That means that when there's a data producer, we can actually see, are you meeting the standards that we've defined and we've jointly agreed upon? And if so, you're welcome to submit. If not, then fix it, and then you can submit. Once that happens, we have the lineage so that if something breaks over here, some other entity that's using that data stream, we can trace it all the way back. This is a process of evolution, but it's one that we're actually making good progress on. And I have to say that when we started on this journey, we were nowhere close to this. Nowhere close to this. Hundreds of thousands of tables in a lake, partially in other systems, vendor-based systems, all kinds of things were going on. It's taken a very, very good deal of effort to get from there to here, and it's going to take effort to get from here to the future, but I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to do it. And that's the conviction that Yao was mentioning.
Thank you very much.
We have to do that.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I'm afraid we're already out of time, but we have 2 more panels coming just now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our speakers.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome on stage our next set of panelists who will be discussing with me the topic of data literacy and talent, and specifically how to build a growth mindset and culture. For this, I would like to welcome on stage Aditya Parameswaran, Associate Professor at UC Berkeley, Prachi Priya, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Team One, part of Publicis Group, Ishita Majumdar, VP of Data Analytics Platform at eBay, and Catherine Campbell, Head of Integrity Research at Instagram. Thank you very much for joining me today. All right. Excellent. Hi, thank you for joining me. So we've heard already a bit about this topic of data literacy. We've heard it earlier during lunch. I kind of heard it during the hallways earlier as well as Martin has been raising it as well a couple of times just today. So I would like to get started with, first of all, setting and creating potentially an understanding of data literacy. Starting with Aditya, could you describe in one sentence what do you mean with data literacy? What is sort of the importance in your opinion?
Yeah, so data literacy, obviously the dictionary sense of the term perhaps is the ability to extract insights from data. And I would say that within an organization, there are different types of individuals who can extract information from data in different sorts of ways. So you have folks who are very comfortable with playing around in an Excel spreadsheet to extract value from data. There are others who might be comfortable in a tool like Power BI or Tableau, so a business intelligence tool. There are others who are very comfortable and at home in a computational notebook like Jupyter, right? And there are yet others who are very comfortable with writing ETL pipelines in Spark and DBT and SQL, right? So data literacy means a lot of things. It depends on what you want to extract from your data. Sometimes it's moving data from one place to another, if it is a data engineer. Sometimes it's just gaining a broad sense of the aggregates and summary of the data, in which case a business intelligence tool or a spreadsheet might help you there.
I'll take it one level up. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to say hi before I start talking. Prachi Priya, Chief Data Officer for Team One, which is part of Publicis Group, like Walter mentioned. Instead of going deep into data literacy, I'll take it just one level up, data culture. And quick audience question. How many of you here have been asked a question, something on the lines of, I have a theory. Can you provide me some data so that I can prove my theory? Right? Of course, we've all been there multiple times. That is not data culture, let me tell you. That is cognitive bias. Data culture would be something where every decision that your company is making is based on evidence and data. Be it whoever is talking, is it the CEO, is it the data scientist, whoever is talking about it, tone doesn't matter, it just matters, it's an evidence-based usage of data. So that's data culture, and I'll say data literacy is a very important pillar of your overall data culture, which means you can read, write, communicate using data.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Catherine.
I agree 100%, and I would just add to the cultural aspect, the value aspect, right? That as we're having conversations, as we're making decisions, the assumption is that either it is data supported, not necessarily data driven, because I do think that there are other things to consider, but data supported, or that we are going to obtain the data necessary to feel comfortable that we were making the right decision.
I think I agree with all my panelists, and I'm going to use the word persona throughout this panel, so you're going to get used to it. If the data culture is, let us leverage data to make better decisions and to offer better customer experiences, then you double click on that and you get a variety of user personas. And raise your hands as I call them out: data engineers, data scientists, product managers, category managers, legal, HR executives. All the personas should be able to access data, interpret data and data derivatives, and be able to drive the culture, that is decisions and customer experiences. To me, that is the holistic end-to-end data literacy for all personas.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Aditya, a question that I have from you is like, in our conversation leading up to this panel, I really like the point that you made about sort of that an organization, as a matter of fact, has different kinds of personas. Some personas that might prefer using one tool, maybe a certain kind of language, a certain kind of process. It's really difficult to sort of like homogenize sort of things across an organization. Do you feel that there's sort of like a kind of a tension between, on the one hand, sort of centralizing data literacy, and on the one hand, sort of like a process of decentralization, which might be potentially less effective, but might satisfy the desires of these different kinds of personas?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to that question, and I'll try to unpack each one. So first is a question of centralization and decentralization, right? So an organization that says, hey, you know what, all of the sub-organizations need to obey a common schema, need to have a certain sense of rigor as they contribute to a so-called data lake, as Ashok was mentioning. That's one kind of approach, which is a centralized approach. There's a managed sort of network of data assets, right? The benefit of that is that you have tight governance, you have tight enforcement of rules, strict schemas. When you pick up a data set from that data map, as he mentioned, you're guaranteed to have high quality. On the other hand, it reduces agility, right? That's the other extreme. You want to also allow teams to try experiments quickly, iterate quickly, be able to see if some idea works without having to obey this rigid schema. So at the other end, you have decentralization, where individual teams are allowed to execute quickly on the tools that they are happy with, on the data assets that they have at hand, just so that they can build those AI models, prove a point, and get something from it, right? So one of the things that we've been doing at Berkeley as part of my research, which led to a company called Ponder, is thinking about where do these personas live. Like data scientists, for example, they love tools like Pandas and Scikit-learn and NumPy. These are tools that they are very comfortable with, but they break down. And so in order for us to support them, continue to be agile and work with their data sets quickly, try things out quickly, prototype quickly, we need to continue to support those tools, but allow them to scale up to larger and larger data sets, allow them to be more efficient with what they're doing. So there's this balance between centralization and decentralization, and different organizations strike that balance in different ways. But I do think that it's important to not compromise on agility in favor of, I guess, more governance.
Thank you very much. Ishita, I saw you nodding there. Do you agree? Is that a similar experience you share?
I think what he's doing in academia, I've taken all the learnings and I'm incorporating them in my organization. So this is amazing, because we do have centrally, I lead a data organization team, and my goal is to make sure to build platforms with the right capabilities for the right personas. Some people love building ETL pipeline and will other SQL gurus. Some people, the executives, they ask me, give me drag and drop. I don't want any of this. So I have to make sure that my platforms has the capabilities to serve both. But individual organizations also have these small skunk team which are doing rapid prototyping, and I encourage them 100%, go do it. Go do it, break it, make it fast. When you want to come to production, come to me. Don't throw it in the production, that's not allowed. But do it within your own domain, experiment it, see what works, see what doesn't. What works, come into the central experimentation platform, come into the central launch and release management platform. That would help.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And Prachi, earlier when you were mentioning sort of your definition of data literacy, I think you summed it up quite nicely, which is sort of the ability to find data, to read data, to use data. And I'm wondering if we want to create sort of like a data literacy across the organization, without any doubt, we're going to find some people who might have a non-technical background, such as in a lot of cases, the CEOs themselves, right? And when it comes down to sort of expanding the data literacy to helping CEOs or other kinds of non-technical audiences within an organization to use data to make business relevant decisions, have you found sort of an approach that works? What's sort of the best way to achieving this across companies?
Absolutely. I would quote a number, just because we are all data geeks here, on just the adoption of data culture. It's from New Vantage Research. Everyone wants to be a data-driven company, adopt a data-driven culture. Only 19.5% of all the companies that were surveyed, they claim that, yes, we have a data-driven culture. So it's still a challenge. Now, I'd say the biggest challenge that most everyone was quoting was people and company culture. So coming back to your question about how we have made success, in this stride, number one thing I would say we use is, I think that came up in the last panel too, that your data strategy should be 100% linked to the business strategy or to the measurable business outcomes. And it could be, it's so easy to be enamored by the next data tool or the shiny tool that we are building. It's so amazing, the data science modeling. But then how does it impact? Like, what's in it for me? If the CEO asks, you should be able to answer that. Be it you're gaining X number of customers or increasing the sales of the product, whatever it be, I think there should be a direct link. That helps with the adoption of any kind of data culture and adoption of your tools. Second, I would say definitely having a proper data literacy program, and you mentioned kind of a different persona, and you were talking about it. And that data literacy program also has to be people-centric in terms of who is going to access that. So if someone from my creative team is going in and talking about what is customer lifetime value, there should be a course or program for him, versus if my data scientist wants to learn more about building that machine learning model, there's a difference. So there's layers and levels in that as well. So I'll stop at 2 and I'll let my panelists speak.
Yeah, I'm actually quite surprised. I think you mentioned 19%?
19.5% only, yes.
19.5% of companies that are only the ones that say they have a data culture.
Yes.
Which is something that is interesting, because I find that most of the sort of organizations that you see out there kind of like tend to be more optimistic, let's say. Catherine, we've heard a bit about sort of these programs for promoting data literacy across an organization. And I think there's a bit of a challenge sometimes, because on the one hand, we want to have sort of the personal relationships between, let's say the CDO or like data scientists and other people. But then on the other hand, it's very difficult when you're operating at a large organization, potentially like Instagram, that sort of is quite large. It's difficult to scale it, I guess, right? What kind of how should a program like this look like in your view?
Well, the systems, and yeah, it is a very large organization. It was kind of humbling when I first started there to realize that there's 2 billion active monthly users that will be impacted by whatever new product experiment we run. The access to the data, I think, is kind of the foundational work that the prior team was talking about. I think it's the gap between accessible, relatively standardized, clean data with appropriate data governance. That part is pretty much there, but the gap between that and the insights and the ways of interpreting the data and making sure that, number one, the way someone interpreted the data can be supported, right? That they have the right context in which to interpret that data. And also that you are each building on each other's work, that you're bringing different torches to the same information question, as opposed to kind of going off in different directions. So that's where you start to get into, I think, the soft organization, the communication circles, right? Bringing together people from these different areas, making insights available. Again, as we talked about with data, insights and reports and that sort of thing have to have some kind of governance to them, but making sure that you are doing everything possible from a process standpoint to have that sharing and communication going on, I think is what becomes critical.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift the conversation potentially a little bit more into the sort of the topic of talent. And I think when we talk about data literacy, at the end of the day, it's really about people that we're talking about here, right? So and talent is really, in every of the forums and the workshops that we've hosted, talent comes up every single time. And in my research for preparing for all of the workshops, I looked at some of the articles that The Economist produced. I found a very suitable one. It said, the war on tech talent. And the first article that I found, I was like, perfect, and it was dated 1991. I looked up for a few more articles, and literally every year there was another sort of slightly more up-to-date article that we wrote. And so I want to know, really, Catherine, really continuing with you, what's your experience on this sort of search for talent? Is this something that sort of, to what extent does this create basically the headaches?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think we're going to have a conversation later about, you know, talent versus culture. Yes, as someone mentioned earlier, you know, the war for talent, the cost of talent, you know, that's an arms race, and there's certain people that could work anywhere within 2 days of leaving their current job, right? To me, that's not, trying to find those people and bring them on for a certain period of time is not the solution. The solution is to get everyone in your organization to a certain level of competency, but also excitement, to realize that this is not, oh, now you have to justify your decisions with data, as you were kind of talking about earlier, but you are empowered. You are empowered to bring data to shed light on problems that bother you, on opportunities that you think you've seen. And we trust you enough to give you the tools and the access and the training to do that. And frankly, I think that creates a much broader asset base for you, but it's also great for retention, because one of the biggest reasons people leave their companies is they don't feel they have room to grow. So if they have that skill set that you're adding to, and they feel recognized and empowered to participate in guiding the organization forward, I think that's worth whatever the highest cost data scientist on the market is right now.
Interesting. So we've mentioned wages, we've mentioned sort of the excitement part of it, possibly the opportunity to grow, maybe relatability even of the issues that they have to tackle. Aditya, what, spoken sort of plainly, what do you think really matters to data scientists at the end of the day? Are there any points that you feel you would like to add to?
Yeah, I wanted to build off of what Catherine said in terms of talent. I don't know if you folks know about the statistics on how hard it is, maybe you've experienced the pain yourself, how hard it is to hire data engineers versus data scientists, so, or even data enthusiasts, folks who know a little bit of Excel, data jockeys, much easier to hire versus data scientists who know a little bit of Python and data science tools, versus folks who know SQL, distributed computing expertise, Spark, and what have you, right? So data engineers, really hard to hire in the market. You have a lot more of the first two personas, the business analyst and the data scientist, a lot fewer data engineers. And this is, at least personally, I've seen the advent of new tools that could improve the lives of data analysts and data scientists without them being so reliant on the data engineer persona. A concrete example that we encountered in our startup was this company that spent 6 months translating a script that a data scientist had cooked up in their laptop into something that can be run at scale. And this was done by a data engineer, 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. And our tool, for example, did this automatically. So this took 6 months that could be done automatically, and this is just a better tool. And there's a new breed of tools out there, new breed of data science tools out there that allow you to take what data scientists are doing on a day-to-day basis and allow it to be scaled up. And similarly, what data analysts are doing and allow it to be scaled up. What is this doing? This is freeing them up, right, to try more things, be more risky with stuff that they are trying out, and potentially have more impact on their business rather than waiting for 6 months for someone else to come in and translate it and see if it has value, because the feedback loop is another 6 months before they get to try something else, right?
Interesting. So it's almost like relying on like automation technologies to sort of automate tasks that might be more repetitive in order for us to be able to say, okay, this is taken care of, let me now focus on the work that sort of, as Catherine mentioned earlier, might feel more relatable, might excite me, might give me a sense of purpose. All right. Thank you very much. We have now 5 minutes for an audience Q&A again. So if anyone has any questions, we have a roaming microphone going around. Yes, the gentleman just over there. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, IBM and Economist Impact. This is fascinating discussion. My name is Todd Kulik. I'm with TiVo. I do software engineering and math as a background. I want to double click on rigor. I heard the word rigor. We have a joke at the office. Any number on a slide deck that has 2 digits after the decimal place, everyone believes. I'm interested in anything you guys have learned, techniques. How do you drive? It's one thing to say we want data literacy. It's another thing to check our work. In the engineering world, we have lots of techniques for this. We have code reviews and pairs programming and lots of evolution over the last few years. I don't see it on the data side, and I see people very convicted with bad, bad decisions that they then fix when they find a bug in the code. And I wonder how we stop that a little sooner, get first-time correctness. Interested in any of the panel's thoughts.
I don't mind taking
Who wants to go
that,
first?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah.
So, like, I think your point is absolutely valid. There needs to be a sense of whoever is producing any statistics, any aggregates, anything that makes its way into a slide, there has to be some verification process. In fact, I would argue that the problem that you're talking about is going to get even more exacerbated with the likes of ChatGPT that allow anyone to go in and ask a question of their choosing, and the large language model is synthesizing stuff, and you have no idea how that stuff was generated, and presumably that's going to make its way to a slide as well. So I think there are a few facets there. One is sort of classical software engineering practices that allow you to inject rigor into the data science process, much like you would in software engineering, right? So code reviews and sort of double checking each other's work to make sure that stuff it makes sense. So that's one thing in terms of practices that would help. The other is basic training, right? And ultimately just being able to realize that if the more number of hypotheses you try, the more likely it is you're going to find something that is an aha moment, but doesn't mean that there is actually a correlation. It's just like just something you looked for enough things, you found something that stood out. So there's confirmation bias, various types of biases that could pop up because you looked at your data too much, right? So I think there's that piece around training and making sure that people are aware of these biases, and also software engineering techniques that allow people to check each other's work. So that would be my thinking.
Let me add to that. The rigor was such a basic concept all the way from south to north, meaning raw data is coming in. We take raw data and we land it on the warehouse in some structured form. We take that and form curated data, and then that data is piped into various platforms and tools to give you data derivatives, whether it's a metrics, reports, visualization. There is data observability all along the life cycle of this journey, so that anytime there is a quality issue, coverage issue, completeness issue, we get an alert and we make sure that the validity is maintained. That's one. The second is we have started a data analytics university about 5 years ago to make sure that quarterly courses are offered. There is a new orientation course. There is a course for data engineers, data scientists, executives. We customized it so that you train on these tools, you train on understanding what data is needed and how the data sets are being used for different insights. And the third one is validation. Whenever we run a query, we have a Git for SQL. Everyone has to put in their SQL in the Git. It is reviewed by your peers to see if that SQL is the right SQL for what the intention is. Once it is approved, then only is it run in production.
Thank you very much. All right, we are out of time. I saw a few more people raising their hands there. If anyone has any questions, I would just like to remind you there will be a networking session outside shortly, so you'll be able to speak with the panelists directly. Great, so thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed the discussion. Please thank our speakers. Thank you very much. All right, great. We're now at our final panel on the topic of data-driven futures, harnessing ethical and responsible AI. So this is a conversation that I'm actually really looking forward to. And for that, we have joining us GK Chong, author of How to Lead in Data Science. Thank you very much, GK. And Dan Rouse, AI and Data Counsel at TikTok. Now, responsible AI, ethical AI, these are really some of the conversations that I think are relevant for any business as soon as they basically start scaling their AI products, as soon as basically they put their data to work. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. There are a couple of numbers that I would like to mention here. One study that we conducted a couple of years ago found that out of 260 senior IT leaders, 90% agree that the potential long-term benefits and cost savings associated with implementing responsible AI far outweigh the initial costs. So there's really a business imperative in making sure that the AI applications that we develop are used in a way that's trustworthy. And I would like to start with GK with my first question. There's really a lot of talk about sort of AI ethics, responsible AI, trustworthy AI, and so on. I'm sure some of our audience members have a couple of other definitions that they've heard about. Do people here, just to get the definition right, do people here usually refer to one or the same thing? Or are we actually talking about different kinds of angles of AI usage here?
Yes, so there's definitely a lot of definitions around, and some are principles, some are regulations and policies. I sort of see those as two broad classes, the carrots and the sticks. Right. So the carrots are the principles where we aspire to, and you hear a lot about those in company offsite, what we aspire to be our principle, our AI principles. And then there are those ones that are set up and sort of the stick side of things, the policies and regulations, where there may be some negative consequences that's associated with non-compliance. So with those two, I see that there is actually a lot of innovation that's happening, both from government organizations like the European Union, as well as independent organizations for setting the principles forward so that we can eventually be more responsible and self-govern most of the issues that we see that comes up. And many of these issues come up in large global organizations, especially that crosses different cultural boundaries, where we're starting to see that across the different culture around the world, there are actually maybe some detailed principles that may actually differ across national boundaries and culture boundaries that multinational companies need to adhere to and be sensitive to.
Thank you very much. Dan, same question to you. So how should we look at responsible AI, ethical AI? What are we talking about here realistically?
Sure. Well, before I start, I'm the least lawyery lawyer you're going to meet, but I have to say this. I'm here in my individual capacity. My opinions are my own. They do not represent my client or prior client's views, and I won't be able to answer specifics on those. I feel much better now. Thank you.
Very forward-looking statement.
I'll send you the prospectus. Yeah, I agree with GK. There's some terminology on the incentive side and some, I think, on the more punitive side. And there is, in the world of AI ethics or responsible AI, the trend right now, I think, is responsible AI. I think part of that, it's not a concrete thing because there's no definition globally, but a lot of that is when you say AI ethics, it implies just kind of 6 or 7 principles on a plaque in some conference room or somewhere. But if you say responsible artificial intelligence, it implies a program that needs program management, that needs resources, that needs the entire organization structure behind it.
And accountability as well.
Yep, accountability, which is a good AI ethics principle, sir, which we can talk about. But yeah, I think as we're seeing different regulations in the works right now, EU and Brazil are clearly kind of the most prominent ones in the works. NIST just came out with their AI framework a couple weeks ago. And the terminology is, I think, less important than the meaning behind it. And I think when we spoke previously, university in Switzerland did a survey of about 150, 180 AI ethics principle documents. And you see the same concepts coming up over and over. And a lot of them are interchangeable, a lot of them are interleafing, and very similar to what we call this. I'd say it's a quiet industry rebranding for responsible AI, because it implies something bigger than just an ethics statement.
Interesting. And it's a fascinating point that you mentioned, Dan, about the study from, I believe it's ETH Zurich, that sort of compiled all these AI ethics frameworks. And I remember it was specifically, I think in 2018, that all of a sudden these AI ethics frameworks started popping up all over the place. And I'm just wondering, do you feel that AI ethics and potentially these responsible AI programs, are they more of a recent phenomenon, or has this been around for more years? Or why are we observing this more like mainstream discussion about the responsible use of AI? What's sort of at stake here?
I think, and I'll defer to GK on a lot of this because he's much more in the details on this, but I think AI, responsible AI, is having the moment that privacy did about 10, 15 years ago. And I've been in the AI space for about 12 years, and it's a very collaborative space with technical people, operational people, legal people, everyone involved. And there's no real global body that's coordinated all this. But as AI has, I think privacy actually helped AI a lot, because there's a lot of overlap there too, because both of those represent, or can represent, not always, a very specific form of intimacy that scares people, and that then we have the arguments between, should industry regulate itself, or should this be a regulated topic? And it becomes bigger and bigger, and every couple of years there's a new thing. Obviously, ChatGPT is the new accelerator this year in the press. But I'll defer to you on the other points.
Yes, I agree. There is definitely a lot of discussions about it, especially recently. And I think that's actually something to be celebrated as us data practitioners in the field, right? It's a symptom of that we're actually making a lot of social impact. And with that social impact comes with a lot of responsibilities. And those particular responsibilities could be as detailed as an infinite scroll and the recommendation engine, where we'll scroll those short-form videos for hours at a time, some of us, to be like something that could affect the next job we get, like by how recruiters are being recommended different resumes. So it's those particular deep impact that any particular algorithm may have on people's lives that is actually giving rise to a lot of the focus on the AI responsibility, AI ethics around it. And just to give one specific example, there is a toolkit, LinkedIn toolkit for fairness, LinkedIn Fairness Toolkit, that is specifically there to measure for different groups that we look at, are we producing any biases in our algorithms? And by the way, like biases commonly happen, right? Like to be able to recommend a resume when a recruiter is using LinkedIn tool, well, there is a lot of recommendation that's there. But what is the recommendation usually based on? Past human behavior. And we see in a lot of reports that despite the best effort, unless you have double-blinded way of looking at resumes, there are inherent biases in typical recruiter decisions. So how do you remove those and be responsible? Because every single little bit of bias can actually mean someone gets an opportunity or don't get an opportunity. And there's so many different definitions of fairness. Like just for male-female ratio, do you want to enforce 50% male, 50% female candidates? Well, in some profession like data science, right, it's usually about 25 to 75% ratio. In something like nursing, it's 90% female and 10% male. So just enforcing 50% is not the right thing to do. And then there are also other things about equal opportunity. For equally qualified candidates, from the way that it's described their profile on LinkedIn, you give them equal screen space for the search result. Those are some of the things that has to be traded off in detailed algorithm. And whenever you have these biased data sets, not just across male-female, but also across many other dimensions, specific algorithm decisions have to be made. So those are the kind of responsibilities.
And JK, to follow up on that, as I think we've now quite nicely defined the issue and defined the problem. And one question that I think will undoubtedly be very valuable for members of our audience, both here as well as those joining from home, is the question: how, if we're an organization that really wants to build trust and establish trust at every stage of the AI lifecycle, say really from design and development to implementation and monitoring, so how can we do this? What sort of is there a way of summarizing it nicely, sort of in just a couple of minutes?
So it starts with recognition, right? That there are biases in the world. You know, we can't change the world in one day. And recognizing those biases allows us to be self-aware and actually be conscious and make conscious decisions about how to move forward. The way that I've seen it work very well is this tight relationship between product and data science. It's that intersection that is so rare in many organizations, where product managers are sometimes new to some of the detailed data biases that's inherent in the data we collect. And then data scientists are so focused on improving accuracy, producing those beautiful ROC curves, KS metrics, right? So that it's hard to be directly connected to the actual social impact of those algorithms, those like minute differences in the same F-scores, right? So it's those kind of understanding across functional boundaries between product and data science and AI that I see as the key.
Thank you very much. Dan, sort of building on these points that GK just made, there's, I was in a debate just a few weeks ago together with a fellow colleague of mine, and the topic there was, okay, we have this willingness to use AI responsibly. Now there is a question, of course, on who is accountable, right? And one of the sort of the points of discussion were, is this something that operationally speaking, so to make it actually work, should this be the task of, say, a number of people within an organization, leadership within data scientists or products, or is it realistic to say everyone has a responsibility to ensure that the tools we developed are developed responsibly?
That's a good question. I think organizationally, everyone is responsible, but specifically, and I flippantly referred to a plaque with a bunch of values on the wall, that's where it starts. It starts with introspection about what are our values as a company. And that's where you come up with, you know, your AI principles. They generally are going to hit on the same topics, and we can talk about that in a later minute. But from there, it becomes essentially, you know, a process of how do we ground these principles? What is the process? This is essentially AI by design, very similar to privacy by design, which has the same characteristics in terms of organizational structure and process. And that brings the accountability, because then it becomes a compliance and cultural issue. Cultural first, probably, because I think that's what will get people motivated to get into it. That becomes part of your product design.
Interesting. And do you see, you've mentioned, for example, that, and I love the idea of sort of AI by design and really sort of the comparison with sort of privacy by design. You mentioned sort of the idea of setting in place a process through which these ethics principles can be brought to life, if we want, right? And I remember some of sort of the technical people that I've spoken to in the past, whenever I said process, they were like, oh God, this is going to sort of prevent us to move fast and break things, so to speak, right? Do you feel that there's a tension necessarily between innovation on the one hand and on the other hand sort of maintaining or ensuring that these principles are not just, as you said, sort of a poster in a boardroom, but actually something that is part of,
there is a tension. I mean, anytime you add new rules, basically, people don't like it. So, and it's very easy at a company to say, okay, we're going to, on the issue of is the AI operating as intended, you can write up some white papers on it and assign someone to it, and everyone's like, yay, we launched it. But if you don't have the program to keep that going, then it's a fail to begin with. So it needs to be a cultural sell. And frankly, I think all product people, anyone who works with data, same thing happened with privacy, right? Is that you are respecting the autonomy, the data, and the influence that your AI may have on people, very similar to privacy. So when people buy into that ethos, I think it makes it easier. But there's always, of course, as a lawyer, when I walk in a room, people are like, oh God, what's he going to do? But I try not to issue new rules, because if you can create a program with business people and really sell the idea that, I think, were you referring to that earlier, GK? That people see the benefits.
Yes.
And it's not easy, and sometimes it comes out of nowhere, but it helps ease that tension.
Interesting. All right, and GK, one question to you on the back of that. There is quite sort of a lot of let's say policy initiatives that are sort of developing right now. I know in the US there has been sort of the AI Bill of Rights, if I'm correct. In the EU, we've been for a while now in discussions about sort of producing this EU AI Act. When developing these kinds of policies and sort of looking at these regulations that are now on the horizon, what do you think are sort of maybe a couple of key lessons, maybe a couple of things that policymakers will need particularly careful of as they develop these policies?
Wow, that's a really deep question. Well, I'm not sure if I'm in the position to speak about what policymakers should be thinking about, but I can definitely speak to, as practitioners, what we can aspire to be self-governing so that we don't have to have someone telling us what to do. Right? So from that perspective, I see it's more of who we want to be known as, right? It's not about launching a product, a particular line of business today, but really several years down the road, is this going to be a positive example or a negative example in someone's textbooks, and how we want to go down in history. And there has been actually a lot of pioneers in the field that became negative examples. There is a certain dating app that was doing A/B tests on how the people on the platform are rated as a match or not. And that's actually a very sensitive thing. And people may be wasting years of their lives being with someone who they believed, because of a platform score that was part of an A/B test, that was a good match. And it's those really deep impact that we have on people's lives that when putting together even just an A/B test that could influence 5% of your customers, that we actually need to think deeply about. And if we're doing the right thing, I believe that we at least would be comfortable with ourselves, regardless of what the regulation would come down.
Thank you very much, both. All right, we have some time for some Q&A. Who has some questions? Everyone, please raise their hands. Okay, we have two people here. Let's first collect the questions, and then we're going to answer them. So one, and the gentleman in the front. Please keep them focused on the topic, please. Yes.
Yes, sir. Now, I'm a professor. Till 2018, my students used to get horrified seeing what people are doing with data, the companies. From 2019 onwards, I noticed my students are saying, hey, if you smart guys in the room, data guys, can tell me what my life is about, who my life partners or whatever, why should I think for myself? What do you say to that?
Okay, one question. And the gentleman here.
Is it on? Okay. So, when I went to law school last time, I was told you always ask that question when you really want to put somebody at an unease. So this is an unease question for the lawyer in the room. And it is about a provocative statement that AI will never be ethical because it's a very tool-dependent kind of situation. We want AI to be safe and secure. We want AI to be private, to be responsible, and to know the robust and reliability, and while ensuring that we are able to be transparent and explainable, and while maintaining the accountability and being fair. But we see that it has not presented itself to be like that. It has presented itself to be inconclusive. It has presented itself to be instructable, misguided, unfair, and transformative. And we have issues about its traceability also. So, having heard your comments about the framework, the tools, the ethics, my question here is this something that we as an AI practitioner or students of AI needs to drive, or is there another body which has regulatory impact kind of decides for us?
Thank you. All right, 2 minutes each for an answer.
Well, can I address that one first? And that's a very good question. By the way, I never want to use the AI you were just describing. It sounds terrible. No one's saying AI is always ethical. I hate, I'm not supposed to use the word hate. I dislike the word artificial intelligence in the first place. It's just an extension of us, and we are imperfect. And nothing's ever going to be perfect unless it's an a priori truth. So that goes back to, do we need an NGO or governing body to help guide this along? That's an interesting concept, because going back to what Walter was referring to earlier, lawmakers are not good at legislating with technology. Please don't tell any of them I said that, by the way, because I'm still my reputation. But we strive for the best, just as with humans. AI will always make mistakes. AI will always have to be monitored, kind of like a child. But yeah, so far, I'm not aware of any large governing bodies. I mean, there's a lot of institutions that obviously offer guidelines, but it's just me guidelines on top of more imperfectness, and we just need to strive for the best. And that's why it kind of goes back to the organization on how they structure this and how they implement it and how they keep it going at their company. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
GK, final point before we wrap up.
So which question should I be answering?
Whichever you prefer.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first one very clearly, but I'll just comment quickly on the second one. I agree 100% that nothing's perfect. Even the calculator or even the computer, a bit may flip because of cosmic rays, right? So there is nothing that's perfect, and especially with AI, I see that many of the misperceptions come from an unrealistic expectation that just because the result comes from a computer, that is going to be correct. And in fact, what I'm seeing now with all the infrastructure that we're building, with data, with algorithm, it's very much like training a kid, right? You know, the kid is only as smart as what we teach him, her, them, right? So there is as long as we adjust that expectation and understand that all our creations are imperfect, just like ourselves, then all those regulations, principles can be adjusted to have that compassion to just another being. It's just that it lives in computer.
Brilliant. Really quickly, I don't want to miss the second question. What was? I don't think I quite heard the end. What's?
I'm afraid we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
So why don't we continue the conversation outside, and then we'll be able to address the question directly. Sorry, I have very strict time limitations, but we can continue the conversation outside. In fact, we now have a break of 20 minutes before we start the debate. Thank you so much for everyone participating at the panels. I think this has been really a fascinating discussion. I've personally learned a lot, and I'm sure that you found this discussion incredibly valuable. I would like to invite you now for a 20-minute break, and we'll then continue with our debate on two motions. I would also like to thank our audience joining us from home. The live feed will now come to an end, but you will have the opportunity to participate in the debates, of course, if you would like to join one of our sessions in person in the future. Thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing our discussion just very soon. Thank you.